My name is Chris Maisano. I'm originally from Melbourne, and I grew up in a very beautiful, close family. Growing up, my dad was the pastor of a church, which made me a pastor's kid. Anyone a pastor's kid? Nice. Being a pastor's kid made me feel like I was this really loved kid at church. Made me feel like all the other kids wanted to hang out with me. Made me feel like all the parents wanted their kids to hang out with me. I thought that no matter what I did in life, I had a fast track pass to heaven because my dad was the pastor. And because he was the pastor, I felt like the coolest kid at church. My primary school life, however, was very different. I wasn't the cool kid at school. I wasn't the kid that everyone wanted to hang out with. In fact, my friends would play a game with me at recess and lunch called Ditch Chris, which basically involved my friends running and hiding from me so they didn't have to hang out with me. Everyone say, "Aw." What this did was plant a seed of insecurity in me. I couldn't quite understand why on the weekends and when I was with my family, I was this much-loved kid that everyone wanted to hang out with, but during the week and when I was, at school and where I spent most of my time, I had no friends and no one to play with. And so I made a pact with myself that high school was going to be different. I was going to do whatever it took to be one of the cool kids. And it wasn't long before I started hanging out with all the wrong kids doing all the wrong things. I remember at the age of 12, I'd tell my parents I was staying at a friend's house, and I would, but there'd be alcohol there and drinking, just 12. And at the age of 15, I started taking party drugs, pills, speed, ecstasy, just the age of 15. By the time I was 18, I'd tried just about every party drug under the sun. All because I wanted to be loved and accepted. I didn't want to be ditched by my friends. Pretty soon I was living a double life. I'd go to church on weekends with my family, raise my hands at all the right moments, say all the right things, look the part. But behind closed doors and when I was with my new friends, I was a completely different person. But all wasn't lost. God had blessed me with an amazing creative gift ever since I was young, and I wanted to be a creative and a designer. I used to love drawing my favorite superheroes growing up, and so at the age of 18, I got a job at a small creative agency, and by the time I was 23, I was a creative director of one of the biggest advertising agencies in the world. I had all the major clients working on all the major brands, on all the best campaigns and projects. Brands like Adidas, FIFA, Honda, Ford, Sports Girl, Qantas, Lindt Chocolate, all these brands you'd be really proud of. I also started running with a couple of friends of mine, one of Melbourne's biggest nightclubs. I mean, I lived the high life. I had the great job, the title, the fact I earned a six-figure salary, the fact I could party at my own nightclub on the weekends. From the outside, it all looked awesome. What the world will tell you is a great life. I felt like I was living that. I was only 23. I remember I started taking cocaine at the club on Friday nights. Fridays turned into Saturdays, Saturdays turned into Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. I took cocaine every day. Felt like it made me more creative, like I could get more work done, like I could be more productive. And it felt pretty socially acceptable. It felt like it was a drug that people in suits and ties do, or the celebrities do, and it felt like it was this cool drug. And so I remember we would stay up late working on creative projects at work, high on coke, and we didn't miss a beat. But in gaining all of this, I'd stop going to church, completely distance myself from my family, distance myself from any good or positive influence in my life, and I'd tell anyone getting in the way of the lifestyle I was living that I was simply busy or traveling for work. It was just that easy. I remember at the age of 28, I was a bit over the creative industry. It felt very repetitive. It felt like a brief had come in, you'd work on the project, you'd send it out, next brief, over and over and over. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to start my own fashion label. With a bunch of money saved, off I went. And that's when I was introduced to ice. Within weeks, I spent thousands of dollars. Within a couple of months, I spent tens of thousands of dollars on ice. Wasn't long before I lost my house, my car, all the things I'd accumulated, all the things I thought that made people love me, they were gone. Not to mention the people I'd surrounded myself with, all the people that I looked for love and acceptance from, they were gone. And the pieces of my life were clouded in shame. I tell people, but I used to be, and I once was, and I once did, and all these things that I thought mattered and made people love and accept me. I basically began living life, looking at it through a rearview mirror, watching it go by. Suddenly I felt like I was playing a game I once played in primary school called Ditch Chris, except this time I was playing it on my own, because even I didn't want to hang out with me. My parents would reach out to me. My parents were desperate to help me, desperate. The last thing I wanted anyone to know is that I was up high on ice for 3-4 days in a hotel room. You have no idea how dark the place I was in, how broken I was, just how shattered my life was. It was just a mess. I couldn't admit that how I'd gone from this little kid, this beautiful kid from a beautiful family, Christian family, how I'd just made a mess of my life. I couldn't admit that I'd been beaten by this drug, and it just had me, and it was not letting go. Who knows we have a God who is for us, who loves us, wants to see us whole, not broken. Several years ago, I decided that I needed to change. Something needed to change, that's for sure. And so I went to 180TC here in Sydney, a men's and women's drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre just supported by Hillsong Church, and in order to try and repair my life. If it wasn't for 180TC, I wouldn't have been able to repair and rebuild the relationship I'd left in absolute ruins with my family, my beautiful family, some of them are here. And I wouldn't have had a real encounter and revelation with the love of God. You see, I was looking for love and acceptance from everyone else in my life when the only thing I should have been chasing after is God. You see, the best thing about God is He'll never play ditch Chris with me. He'll never hide from me and make me try to find Him. In fact, God's been trying to find and rescue me my whole life. When I left 180TC, I went on to do Bible college at Hillsong College. I met a beautiful girl who's somewhere in this room, and college is good for that. And I now work full-time here in Sydney as a designer in our communications department with some of the best, most awesome, amazing, loving, faith-filled team. I love them. They're awesome. And again, they're somewhere in this room. I'm so thankful to God that I get to use my creative gifts to work on a creative brief that'll never get old. The brief of seeing people come to know the love of Jesus Christ. It'll never get tired. And lastly, I'm so thankful that God took the broken pieces of my life, the chaos of my life, the mess of my life, took all those broken pieces and gave me a fresh start, a new life, a life that's for Him. And I'm just so thankful. Thank you for listening to my story.
Psalm 51, verse 7 says this: soak me in your laundry, and I will come out clean. Scrub me, and I will have a snow white life. Tune me into foot-tapping songs, and set these once broken bones to dancing. Don't look too close for blemishes, God. Give me a clean bill of health. Make a fresh start in me. Shape a Genesis week from the chaos of my life. Like, what a wild thought is that? That there's David, right? And he's stuffed up pretty much as badly as you can stuff up. He's been caught red-handed, had affairs, murdered, and the prophet comes to him. He says, God's seen. And he could have run, but he didn't. He surrendered. And he actually said to God, Psalm 51, Create in me a Genesis week from the chaos of my life. And what's he asking for? He's kind of asking that God would put him back in the laundry, soak him clean, take his mess and his disorder, the chaos and the crisis that he finds himself in, and he would begin to recreate and restore. I love Chris's story because it's courageous and it's extreme. But the truth is, for all of us in this room, there are times and moments when we wish, if we're honest with ourselves, that we could put ourselves back in God's laundry, that we could let him start over. We yearn for change and for something different. You know, we want something that's meaningful, real, authentic, and actually takes the pieces that we find ourselves holding and turns them into something beautiful. Psalm 51 sets us up for recreation, redemption, restoration. All of these great words, it sets us up for a moment where we surrender yet again to the master artisan, where we put our lives back in his hand and we go, you know what? Do you think that you could do something with my life? What David was looking for was like a great divine exchange, a beauty for ashes moment, a moment where he actually saw God at work in the mess. I love that thought. Because in the beginning, God reveals himself first and foremost as creator. He speaks and he sparks creativity. He speaks and all the lights come on. Vast ocean expanses, incredible, brilliant skies overhead. He speaks and there is life, plants, animals, truth, beauty, goodness, and grace, and his glory is everywhere. God speaks, and it is. And when he looks at his creation, do you know what he says? He says, it is good. And that means that everything that he intended to happen happened in that moment. But if you've been around church for any length of time, and I'm sure you have, you know what happens. The story railroads. We go off track and we get it awfully wrong. We find ourselves living somewhere well out of the intentions and the plans of God. But here's the beautiful thing. God never ends a story in the dark and the chaos. He is a God who specializes in new beginnings. He is the one who sees where things go wrong and how to create order again from the chaos of our lives. Little bit by little bit by bit, he is putting us back together. He is restoring and fixing. He is bringing everything back to original intent. And he speaks over your life and my life. Truth, goodness, grace, beauty, hope, answers. His end game is a good one. You know, his intention is that as you surrender and you submit to him, that little bit by little bit, day in, day out, season in, season out, year in, year out, that his ideas, his imaginations, his dreams for yours and my life would come to pass. Don't you think that is beautiful? Do you know, if your life isn't beautiful, if it isn't good, then you can rest assured that he is not finished working. He is not finished if you find yourself still looking at your life thinking there is chaos and things that are not right. We are created in the image of a created God, and we are created to continue on his creation work. You are artisans and gardeners. You are dreamers and doers. And you partner with heaven to see Genesis weeks come to pass in your life. But it takes courage. It takes courage to put yourself back in the laundry. It takes courage to actually stand up like Chris did and go, you know what, I might need a little bit of help here. And so I want to encourage you today that I believe that this is the start of your Genesis week. This is the start where you get honest with God, where you actually let him do a good assessment of what is going on inside of you with him. And you let him begin to imagine again with you how beautiful your life is meant to be. There is an incredible author, Eugene Peterson, who I love, and he says this, a really beautiful quote. He said, God works with us where we are, not where we think we should be. He works in the messes of your life and my life, in kitchens and in studios. in churches and in homes, outside and inside, in the very day-to-day grit of your life. And he wants to place himself in there because you are his handiwork, created in Christ Jesus for good work. And so this is your Genesis week. I wonder if you would take a look at the screens as we introduce to you an incredible artist in our community, Alexander Mackenzie.
Well, my name is Hannah Hobbs, and I'm here with Alexander Mackenzie. And yes, give it up. Just so that everyone in the room and those joining us online can be on the same page here, you're a 6 times Archibald finalist, a 7 times Wynne Prize finalist. You were commissioned by the Australian War Memorial to do a special mural as a part of the redevelopment of the World War I gallery. And you've been a professional artist for nearly 30 years, over 30 exhibitions, many of them completely sold out. So, with that in mind, my first question to you is, before all of that, where did this all begin for you?
Well, hi everyone. Thanks, Hannah, for having me. For me, I was a drawing and painting from a very young age. So my mum, in fact, still has all my drawings from when I was 2 and 3 and 4. It was always in me. I was that kid who was always doodling in their school books instead of doing the work. And it must have been pretty bad because my parents, in fact, set aside a room in the house for me to use specifically as a studio. It wasn't my bedroom, just to paint in, and I was 11 at the time. That must have gotten even worse, and the mess was sort of spreading through the house. They ended up, in fact, building me a specialised art studio when I was 17.
And so I guess, like many of us in the room, we have these passions and hobbies and things that we begin, especially when we're younger. And you've managed to make that transition from turning your hobby and craft into a long, professional and very successful career. I'm wondering, is there any wisdom that comes to mind when in terms of jumping that gap, turning it into something more serious? Any things you've learnt along the way?
For sure. I recall being at art school with many gifted individuals, more talented than me, like incredible draftsmen and painters. But they seemed to do one thing, and I saw this pattern over and over again, and they kind of come into the studio and, maybe have a coffee, or maybe have a chat, and maybe go for another coffee, and then have lunch, and then maybe might do a bit of work, but we might just have a drink before. And so they never did any work. And so the real epiphany that kind of dropped for me was that, and it's very, it's beautifully illustrated, of course, in the parable of the talents from Matthew, where, the story, of course, where the master's frustrated with his servants who don't use the talents. And isn't that amazing that we that word has even come down to us to mean gifting that's put in our hands. So for me, it was that change of mindset that, okay, if God has gifted you with something, He wants you to work at it and really work at it, not kind of do it in between coffee and Instagram and kind of messing about. You had to work, and so I worked, and really hard for a lot of years, and that was the shift in moving from something that I love to do to being able to make money out of it and survive.
So cool. I recently went to see one of my favorite singer-songwriters, and this person has like a 20-year long career, has written songs that everybody in this room would know. And on this particular night, he brought a new song and he finished singing it and he said, even now, this long into my career, I still freak out every time I do this. Like, are people gonna like this? Is this good? And then it made me think of you. I wondered whether you have those similar experiences. You've had sold out shows and so much success. Do you still feel daunted by the task of creating again?
I always love creating again, but of course, because you're repeating and doing it over and over again over years and years, it still starts anew every time. You can't rest on what you've done, and no one's going to, particularly in art, there's no royalty that kind of rolls on like a great song, for example. You have to make it anew. So that is quite terrifying, but exciting at the same time. So I always, really love getting like a delivery of like 20 blank canvases. I find that so exhilarating and exciting to be able to work on.
Are you nervous at the exhibition when you're showing?
Of course, to the point of, throwing up. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's serious. So like we're seeing some of your work on the screen right now, and I was this person, but I'm sure many people in the room might be thinking that this is an actual location or a photo that you're painting, but could you please tell the story of how this comes to be? Where does this come from? Well,
I don't make paintings of places, so I don't go and sit outside with my easel and make a nice picture of what I'm looking at. I have this kind of very strange thing that has happened to me for quite a number of years, and there's no doubt in my mind what it is or where it comes from, but it happens in the kind of quiet spaces and places of my life when I'm being very still and meditative, and excuse me, makes me feel a bit emotional when I think about it, but it feels like God reaches down and he puts an image of a painting at the back of my head, and it's right there on the right-hand side, and it is completely finished. It's in a white room, and all I say, well, that's it, and I have to make it. And I say, thanks very much.
So it's here, and you paint it.
I paint it. It is finished completely. It's in full colour. It's the scale. It's all the details, all the information. And then I have to do this extraordinarily long process. Sometimes I think, God, wouldn't it be nice if you just gave me like an abstract or something? But no, it is right there, and I go in this very long process of bringing what it is in my mind into existence.
It's amazing. Well, we just want to say a huge thank you for sharing your work with us today, Alexander Mackenzie. Can we put our hands together? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Dee, and I've been part of this house for about 18 years now. Fun, fun, fun. Hasn't been easy, let me tell you that. And anyone that says anything else is lying, okay? Because it's a journey, pretty much a journey. Well, for me, I'm grateful. Whew. Grateful for who he is and everything that he's done. Grateful that I get to call this house my home. Grateful for family and friends, man, some of which right here in this house I've done a lot of life with, almost 2 decades worth. Grateful for deep relationships, not the surface stuff, but the deep stuff. People that jump into the trenches with you. That's what I'm grateful for. Grateful for the seasons, even the challenging ones. Hasn't been easy. Seasons where I felt like I've been overlooked. Seasons where I felt like I've been misunderstood. Seasons where I've been frustrated. Literally going, God, why am I still here? I've wanted to move on. But guess what? God was like, no. I can remember clearly a couple of years ago, I was like, okay, do I go or do I stay? All he said to me were 2 words: build community. Like, okay, let's get back in there. Build, 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 build. See, it's those tough seasons where you have to fight, where you have to press in, where you choose, I'm not going to get trapped in a fence when I have to war for purpose. It's those kind of seasons where you got to keep digging until you hit the rock. Some of us fall short and settle for the sand. But we forget there's rock there. So we've got to keep digging. The types of seasons, that test your core values. What are you actually made of? You know, for me, these seasons have been more about who I am in Him and who I want to be for Him and what I want to do for Him. Grateful for the Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, thank you. Because, He gently reminds me that my leaders are on a journey just as much as I am. Can I get an amen? So for those of you who feel a bit frustrated, feel like, why don't they understand? May I just encourage you, they're on a journey just as much as you are. You know what? Last year, something shifted in me. And I can honestly say it was like a Genesis week. And prior to that, about maybe 2 years or 3 years before that, this one scripture, Proverbs 29:25, in the Message says, "The fear of human opinion disables. Trusting in God protects you from that." The fear of human opinion disables. Trusting in God protects you from that. When I read this, a whole lot of stuff changed for me. Talk about bringing order into my chaos. My prayer life changed. My devotional life changed. I wasn't just rocking up to God and telling Him what I wanted. I actually just hung around and waited for Him to speak. I wasn't going to pray till I knew that God had heard me. I was going to pray until I knew I had heard from God. You know what? I literally have had to, and I have to keep letting go of me and holding on to more of Him. I've got to keep letting go of me and holding on to more of Him. I've got to keep making room for His opinion. I've got to keep making room for His opinion. And I've got to dig deep. Many times I've wanted to throw in the towel, just walk away. But God was like, no. And last year you know how when there's a scripture, you've heard it so many times, but last year, man, I felt like God was speaking directly to me. And it's in Isaiah 43:19. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. So when I heard that, my thing was, I'm going to chase after his heart. Because that's where I need to be, right there, positioned right there. I just want to keep chasing after his heart. For many of you, I don't know what season you're in, but this verse in 1 Corinthians 2:9 literally dropped into my spirit a couple of weeks ago. It says, however, as it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him. Don't give up. Keep pressing in. Keep digging deeper till you hit rock.
Well, my name is David Andrew, and I've been a part of this team for about 15 years now. And my Genesis week looks a little bit different. See, in 2014, just before Christmas, my wife and I, who'd been carrying our child almost full term, was ready to give birth at any moment. And I'd just come back from a gig. And my wife, Cal, called me into the lounge room to come and wake up our daughter. She hadn't felt her move for a while and it wasn't like her. So I thought we'd just pop up to the hospital and just check everything was okay, just make sure it was fine. And we get inside and they strap a bunch of instruments to her and we discovered that there wasn't a heartbeat anymore. Almost full term. And so we then began to plead with the doctors for what we could do and began to plead with, her body to respond and plead with this God that we'd known to be a miraculous healer and present in our lives and could turn things around. But ours isn't a story about the turnaround. Our story sees us burying our daughter in a tiny white coffin. We lay our body in the ground and we're just crushed by this weight that no parent should ever have to carry. And this loss was really profound for us because not only did we lose a daughter and a right and a chance to grow up and to take first steps and to laugh and love and be invited to things like first dances and things that I was really mad about. We also lost this framework of a God who was always meant to come through if you prayed hard enough and you believed the right things and you said the right faith formulations and you meant it enough and you had the right scriptures to back you up. And I remember just being alone, contemplating this lostness, feeling adrift in a universe that I no longer knew and no longer cared for, staring up in these heavens. And I'm firing my disappointments up at the heavens. I'm firing my how dare yous and my heartaches and my brokenness and my insults at the divine, at a God that I felt was left wanting. See, my conception of God was largely one that was handed to me. It was a formula of cause and effect, an algorithm of faith that if I evoked in the right way would yield the results that I desired. Look, it's a formula that I loved, but it's a formula nonetheless. And as I hurled insults into the sky, I didn't see clouds part. I didn't feel a divine rebuke. I just felt a sigh, an exhalation, watching what I knew of God, my conception of God, just drift away like the clouds, and I was left with this blank canvas. And I think that it was this blank canvas that created the space that I needed for God to create the Genesis week inside of me. See, in that sigh and in that lostness that I had, even though I lost my God in the sky, He found me in the trenches. I'd like to say that He healed every broken heart and He plastered every crack, but that's just not the case. See, in my pain, I found a God that also suffered. I found a God who was a father who had lost a child himself. That this God wasn't a magician, but He was a constant comfort in the times of trial. He wasn't distant, He was close. He wasn't distant from our pain, but He grieved with us. And we discovered this God in the faces of the people who came to be in the hospital with us and the people who helped us through the next confusing months. It hasn't been easy, it hasn't been comfortable. And it hasn't been a story of perfect faith. It's been a wrestle. This question of why did we lose our daughter, Amy Grace Andrew? Why her? Why us? All these questions that we don't have access to. But in our brokenness, we saw God with just a little more clarity, not as a divine cash register, but as a personhood who grieves and suffers with us. Our Genesis week isn't a story of completion. It's a story of process. It's not a destination, it's the road that we are now currently walking on. God's not a formula, He's the very ground of our existence. And guess what? Because He's not a formula, sometimes we don't have the answers. And that's kind of okay. But this is why we create. As artists, we don't trade in answers, we don't trade in solid definitions, we trade in these better questions. As artists, we move in the symbolic, we move in the pre-verbal, we move in the painting and the melody. We move in the poetry where collisions of previously unrelated words take on a fresh new metaphorical meaning, and then songs speak to people in 1,000 different ways. So we don't have these answers, but we have these suspicions. We don't have these definitions, but we've got a chord. And the world often makes no sense. It makes no sense that parents have to bury their children. But we have this suspicion, this thing that I like to call hope. We've got this hope that one day that all that is lost and broken will be found and restored. That the current direction of the world spinning towards death and entropy will one day be reversed as the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. See, when we create things that are beautiful, they're not kitsch, they're not cute, they're in anticipation of the reality of the kingdom of heaven. See, beauty is not a pursuit, it's the rebellion of entropy. It's the prophetic statement that while we have these fleeting moments of beauty in this world, one day this will be the all-consuming reality. That the lost will be found, that the broken will be restored, that those in captivity will only know freedom, that division will be eclipsed by unity, that those who are a mess right now, will be remade in the light of His beauty and His grace. So while we feel the crushing weight of our suffering, we as artists, we rebel against this. We confess that there is a healing light just beyond the clouds. And though we suffer and though we walk through fire, one day we will see clearly now.
And so here we are today, a room full of creatives and our God creator in His studio. You see, I love these stories. They're a story of process, and we ourselves, God, He's the artist and He calls us His work of art. He calls us His masterpiece. I don't know if you wake up in the morning and look yourself in the mirror and say, you're a work of art. You're a masterpiece. I know JD probably does. He probably is. That long hair and those dance moves. But that's the truth. That's what we do. We compare ourselves and we go, yeah, they're a work of art. They're a masterpiece. But I'm here to remind you, God is shaping something so incredible in your life. Don't discount yourself from the work of art that He's shaping. online, in this room, we're all a work of art, a masterpiece, he calls us. I love that picture of us being in God's studio, us being worked on and made. You know, Genesis week is what we're believing every single one of us would have in this place. A moment of clarity, a moment of God bringing light into darkness, bringing order out of chaos. That's what we're believing for. And as much as I'd love to wrap this roller coaster of emotion session up with a beautiful package and 7 certain steps to clarity, it just doesn't work like that. There's no pretty pink bow on top. The truth is, it's a process. God is working. He is making. He is shaping. It's a process. God is doing something in every single one of our lives. And I don't know what Genesis week means to you. I mean, we heard many different testimonies of it just then. In fact, can we thank every single testimony from Chris to Cass to Dave and Dee, so bravely sharing. But I wonder what Genesis week you need. If you believing for a blank canvas and you're believing for a fresh start and God to do the new, guess what? Our God, He is the God of the new. And the same God of Genesis in the beginning is still working. He's a Genesis creative God still creating here and now, and He can do that for you. And maybe you've seen a glimpse of the masterpiece He's shaping, the calling, the outcome, what He's working, the promise, the other side of it. You need to go after that. God's going to put fresh wind in your sails. We're believing that. But for the most part, all of us are found in the middle, in the messy middle. It's what art is like. You start with a blank canvas and you work towards a finished product, and it's what our lives are like. We live between the now and the not yet, the promise and the completion. We live this whole life in the messy middle. It's the tension of the now and not yet. And so rather than giving us steps to clarity, I thought today we should talk about how to walk out our Genesis week. How do we walk out between the now and the not yet? You see, N.T. Wright says we live between the moment of new creation, when Jesus came out of the tomb that Easter morning, and that ultimate moment of new creation when in Revelation 21, God says, behold, on His throne eternal, I make all things new. There's a reminder for someone today, God is making all things new. All things means your things. Don't discount yourself. Don't discredit yourself. God is working in your life, and He makes everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, the pain, the doubt, the unbelief. He works in it all to create a story that is far grander and far more beautiful than we can think or imagine. Our God, His ways are high. His thoughts are beyond ours. And so what we need to do is learn how to walk this out. We need to learn to yield to the Master's plan. Again, in this place, we find ourselves in the middle. We need to yield ourselves to the master artisan and trust that His ways are higher, and trust that it may not be our timing. Maybe you've had a sense of calling and God's put a dream in your heart and you haven't seen that fulfillment yet. You need to trust God's timing. You need to trust His way is better than our way. We need to yield ourselves again to the master's plan. And what we need to do is we need to cling. We need to cleave to His hands. I love this song. It talks about the potter and that we are His clay and He shapes and He molds us. And that's the reality of us becoming new creations. He is recreating us. He is redeeming us, as Pastor Bobby so beautifully talked about our imagination. He's redeeming every part of our life. And one day He's going to redeem all of creation. There's going to be a new heaven, a new earth. There'll be no more weeping, no more pain, no more sorrow. We're going to stand. Can we stand in this place? And I just think we need a moment after all that we've just heard. And wherever you find yourself in this Genesis week, we need a moment of surrender, a moment of yielding, saying, God, your way, not my way. God, your timing. I trust you in this relationship. I trust you in this situation with my calling. There's people in this room, you've wanted to tap out. You've wanted to run the other way. But God is saying, no, continue. Keep believing, keep creating, keep serving, keep stepping into all that He has for you. We need to cling. So we let go of our plan, but we need to hold to Jesus, our master creator. Come on, in this place, can we lift our hands and say, God, we surrender again. We step near to you. We lean into you. We trust your way, your will. Come on, and in this place, we're going to sing these words and we're going to to believe it over our life and everyone online.